Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Okay. Women are not having sex with their husbands if they voted for Trump.
I think not having sex with their long predated Trump's election. I think that's just
we don't know that. Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip and stories from the heart of our studio at GB News in Westminster. My name is Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. Now, the political world, as you all know, has been upturned by Donald Trump's election win last week, and in Westminster, many here are still trying to come to terms with it, not least the Labour Party. Take Sir Keir Starmer. I was with the Prime Minister on his 5,000-mile round trip to the COP29 conference on climate change in Baku, Azerbaijan this week. And on the way there, I asked him why he wasn't back in the UK, focusing on the surge in small boats crossings, dealing with the NHS waiting lists and making the streets safer. Starmer gave a fascinating answer. He said to me, I know you've been interested in this question of spending time internationally. I think the key question for me is what I'm spending my time on wherever I am. And then he said, the two priorities for me on all these engagements with our partners is our economy and economic growth and border control and border security. They are the two dominant themes. That was a change in direction from this government a few months in. Perhaps the influence of Morgan McSweeney, someone you may never have heard of, but is the most important person in government. He's the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, replacing Sue Gray, of course. So perhaps Trump's win last week has focused minds in the team around Keir Starmer. And that's what I want to focus on in this podcast. How does Labour deal with its Trump-shaped problem? Later, I'll be speaking to Bill Esterson. He's a Labour chairman of the Climate Change Committee in the Commons. He'll be keeping a weather eye on the UK's net zero policies in the face of this newly sceptical White House administration. But my first guest is Lord Glassman, the founder of New Labour.
Blue Labour.
But first, my guest is Blue Labour, not New Labour. That's a different thing altogether. Wow. That was an amazing mistake to make so early on in this podcast. A campaign group and political faction that seeks to promote blue-collar and culturally conservative values. Lord Glassman, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Great to be here.
Was it funny I said New Labour there?
It wasn't really funny.
It's funny and not funny. It's both. It's both. Should Labour be worried about Trump?
No. Labour's got to embrace this because it's absolutely consistent with what it needs to do to be a transformative government. First of all, we've left the EU. Now, this is the big thing that our foreign policy...
And you have no problem with that, do you?
I love that. I mean, that had to be done. And look at Germany, look at France, look at the EU. That was a great move by the British people, and we've got to honour it and follow it. And that means we've got to have a post-Brexit foreign policy and a post-Brexit industrial and economic strategy. We've got to recognise that we need to secure our borders. So there's a huge alignment. What Trump is a world historical figure now, and what he represents is the end of globalisation. Labour should be dancing in the streets about this, really.
And yet they're not. And The Guardian is leaving Twitter because they're crossed by Elon Musk, and there's a kind of... Women are not having sex with their husbands if they voted for Trump.
I think not having sex with their long predated Trump's election. I think that's just
we don't know that.
That's just a feature of progressive life. Don't just not enjoying yourself at all.
Yes, okay.
And secondly, The Guardian is not the Labour Party. It's a liberal newspaper, always was a liberal newspaper. And this idea that The Guardian... Labour is a working class party that always represents the national interest and the worker interest. So this is where we've got to go.
And how they get there, I mean, they've got to it is what they have to do, maybe, Labour should do, is not worry about what he says, but what he does. Look at his actions. Is that the point?
I think this... Look,
no.
He's the President of the United States. He won over 50% of the vote. He won the Electoral College. He won the Senate. He won the Congress. So what are we doing here? America is our principal ally in the world. I don't think we should pay the slightest attention to the internal hysterias of American politics. What we've got to do is build a genuine alliance with the United States around the necessity of industry, of reshoring, of breaking the globalized economic system, of pursuing our national interests, and particularly we've got the major problem for me is that our army is 75,000. In order to be an actual army, it's got to be 100,000. I would go further and say that we need to build it to probably 125,000. We've got to absolutely engage with weapons production. I mean,
these are not Labour things to most people.
Oh, but they
Lord
are.
Glassman.
But if you look at what Labour is saying and doing, we've got a 0.5% increase in defence spending.
An ambition to get there on 2.5% of GDP.
And it's got to go further. And if you look at what John Healey, the Defence Secretary, is saying, it's completely consistent with that. We ran that we are not going back into the EU, that we're leaving the EU. We also said that we will continue, and, well, the manifesto said a very interesting couple of words. It said we will deepen and intensify our relationship with Ukraine. Now, that's the space. There's a war going on. I mean, Russia invaded. Trump says he's going to do a deal. What's the British role in that deal? I mean, are we going to go troops on the ground to uphold the ceasefire? These are the questions before Labour. So you've got to understand that the Labour Party is not a Corbyn party any longer. Just liberate yourself from that. This government is defined by anti-Corbyn. It's anti-Russia. It's opposed to globalisation. It wishes to put the concerns of working class people at the centre of its concerns. I'm not saying that there's not an enormous pushback against that, but that is the direction of travel, Chopper, and it's kind of hard to adjust, isn't it?
And the Tories might be hard to getting used to that. They think they might have an easy run at this. They may, if they do what you're saying, I would argue it makes them harder to overturn.
I go further. I think that the principal challenge to Labour is going to come from reform. I don't even see the...
That's what Farage says.
Well, that's what I say too. So Labour's got to engage with the disaffection and anger of working class people with the politics over the last 50 years.
What do you think when you saw 100 officials going to campaign for Kamala Harris?
Losers. I mean, it's just typical. I mean, that wasn't a Prime Minister government decision. That's just...
a party
Look,
choice.
under New Labour, there was this alliance with what was called the New Democrats, Clinton... and all that.
Third way was
historically.
The third way.
I mean, historically, going back to Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, he was the really only president in the United States who was pro-trade union. So there was a natural affinity. Then we had the Second World War, which was a natural affinity with Roosevelt, Truman, and then after the Second World War, Ernest Bevin, who was the Labour Foreign Minister, set up NATO, set up the United Nations. This was all a partnership with the United States. And the Democrats. So there's long historical connections. But as far and Joe Biden was a kind of faint reprise of that, almost a distant echo in that he was an old Catholic trade union guy. But Kamala Harris ridiculous, and so
all the culture war stuff and the they them.
So you know, a bunch of party activists went over. It means absolutely nothing.
Just a quick on Blue Labour, just to explain to viewers and listeners what that is, and Morgan McSweeney, the guy I mentioned, he was part of that, was he, at some point?
Yeah, he was involved in the old days. It's just really traditional Labour, very patriotic, pro-army, pro-union.
20 MPs in it or so? Or
well, we've got
growing
support,
group.
Yeah, we've got support in the... It's always had support in the parliamentary party and in the party as a whole. So Blue Labour just is a party that puts the national interest and the worker interest first.
When I told you about that remarks on economy and migration, I mean, that's quite interesting, I think, from Keir Starmer. He shows he's maybe recognising more of your agenda now.
Completely. Look, it's not my agenda, it's the agenda of the British people. They're sick and tired of identity politics. They don't want the government engaged in all of this. They want to see a strong and robust pursuit of Brexit in the national interest. So I'm just a cipher in this regard.
There will be a choice to be made by this government, won't there? Which way do they go? I can imagine, so far the past 3 months, and I've been with the Prime Minister in where have I been? I've certainly been to Germany. He has been to Paris, he's been to Rome, Brussels. He's trying to forge these ties back into the EU ahead of the renegotiation or rethinking of the cooperation agreement next year. But all it takes is one tweet by Donald Trump to say, "Hey, what are you doing, Keir? I want to do a trade deal," to blow that all up in the air. And what does he choose? Does he want to do a trade deal with the States or be closer to the EU, or is that a false choice?
No, look, we've got to understand, we've got to, in some ways, inoculate ourselves from the EU. I mean, look at Germany, for example. It's a tragedy. The only serious industrial power in Europe that then banned fossil fuels and banned nuclear, and became
post-Fukushima, wasn't it?
And became completely dependent on Russia for its energy supply. Russia cuts it off. It's in an advanced state of industrial disintegration. It's all their own fault. I mean, it's just progressive
virtue signalling, basically. So.
Yeah, and Macron, he's just meaningless now. So this whole idea of Paris, Berlin being the natural axis. No, not at all. Scandinavia is a natural partner, and you notice their social democrat parties are going this way. Tighter border controls, really strong subsidies for business and building their armed forces. And obviously Kiev. We have a really great partner in Kiev. Ukraine has natural resources. Ukraine has all of the things we need for an industrial partnership. So this is, got to forget about it's not going to, that's just a waste of time.
Brexit is a settled issue now, as far as you're concerned, despite the
talk about... I don't want to speak for the Prime Minister, but he said there is no chance of rejoining in my lifetime. And I was imagining he was thinking he would live for a while yet.
Yeah, so we should move on, should we?
Yeah, I think this is not the way it's going.
Does Labour get sovereignty? That's one thing I always question about the party, whether it feels happier amongst the kind of the EU... But sovereignty is
everything.
It is everything.
It is everything. It's the capacity of a nation state to make decisions.
That's what Brexit is.
That's what it is. And what you had for 40 years was a politician's dream world where nothing was their fault. They could. So what we've got, what you're
Brussels.
living through, Chopper, your life now is, whoa. Politicians actually have to make decisions. They can't say there's nothing we could do about immigration, there's nothing we could do. So this is the volatility. You've got to bear in mind that the Conservatives were elected in 2019 with a really huge majority levelling up, get Brexit done, and in an unprecedented way they've just been kicked out. I mean, decimated, their worst defeat since 1832, because they didn't do anything.
No.
They was completely captive to the same globalised nonsense, and the British people just got rid of them. Now, don't imagine that Keir Starmer and his team aren't aware of that. That if they don't deliver on a genuine change in the economic model and on migration and on our relationship with the EU...
Look, would you advise spend less time on going to the EU to Keir Starmer? He's spending a lot
definitely
of time.
Less time to the EU. That's a waste of time. But as you say, he's got to build a set of international relationships about migration,
and that's what he's doing.
And so it's okay.
And maybe that's why the Chagos Islands, I think, is mattering a lot to GB News viewers and listeners, because that's a sovereignty issue, isn't it? It's giving away land to Mauritius.
And if you think about it, it's delicious. Do you ever look, I don't fully get all that. I was told that this was all with the approval of the United States.
With Biden,
Yeah, so...
But there's a suggestion from people who know him, like Nigel Farage, that Trump may step in and withdraw support for that deal because the US want to have in perpetuity access to the area.
In which case,
I
suggest we revisit that deal.
Yeah, quite. Well, that may be on the case.
But don't imagine that the Chagos Islands is the very epicenter of it. It's not.
It just symbolises something about sovereignty. My point to you is they don't get sovereignty.
Two things you need for sovereignty. Well, there's more, but two fundamental things. You need an army and you need to be able to produce your own weapons. That's what I'm really concentrating on at the moment. Our weapons production is pathetic. We just go shopping and buy other people's. Absolute concentration on British-made weapons, and then we have autonomy. We're not dependent.
Yeah, there is a golden share in BAE Systems, so foreigners can't buy that company.
BAE Systems
back in the day,
is beginning to look to me like a bit of a monopoly. I mean,
it's British Aerospace.
Yeah, I know. But they overcharge, and I don't think they're as efficient as they should be. I think we've got to diversify our.
They might
production
deny
system.
Overcharging, by the way.
They certainly would. I'm just saying how you've got to think as a government is you've got to have efficient production.
January the 20th, the world changes when we finally have Donald Trump in the White House. What should happen then? Should we get him on a state visit here, go and be the first through the door in late January, or?
Well, we've got to start now. I mean, we've definitely got to have him over here.
State visit?
Totally. I mean, very much. It has not been the case since 1820 that the British government didn't honour the President of the United States. This is ludicrous.
Normally they get one state visit per term,
yeah,
I think.
sometimes two. You know, look at Clinton. That was a love fiesta. But that is just goes without saying. But what we've got to do is build a relationship and conversation with the people around Trump, so that we can renew our partnership. This is absolutely vital. As I say, the EU is disintegrating. We need American partnership, particularly if we're going to step up in Ukraine.
Yeah. You think then that the Trump is the new trend in history, this idea of this nation first sovereignty, and we're moving away from this kind of idea of big organisations?
Not only, I mean, it's deep. So we were told for years, and Chopper, you've lived through it.
Yeah.
Oh, globalisation, there's nothing you can do. Well, what did that lead to? That led to all of our money being invested in China. Basically, the meaning of Thatcherism, everybody, is the growth and power of the Chinese Communist Party, right? That's
ironically,
yeah, and that's what you get when you smash your industry.
That was Tory led. That was Cameron Osborne. I went on the flew with them to
Cameron
Shanghai in
Osborne,
2012.
It was Thatcher, right? It was Major. It was Blair. It was Brown. It was Cameron, and it was Sunak. All of them. They couldn't break the transfer of the assets to China. Do you remember the Silk Road?
Silk Road, yeah, Belt and
follow the Yellow Brick Road, and what we now face is the industrial decline, which means that we're much weaker. So another thing that Trump means is industry rather than finance. You heard his stuff from Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring the factories back. A real stress on invention, not innovation. Who gives a damn about innovation? We've got to invent new stuff.
And not let it leave the country.
Yeah, and we've got still a remnant of a good research and university system.
Yeah.
We've got to integrate that with our industrial strategy in the army. So what Trump represents is genuinely a new era. It's the era of restoration. Restore the armed forces, restore the integrity of Parliament, restore the authority of the police. A restoration era, and Labour's got to absolutely be ahead on that.
And just finally, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, for the new UK ambassador to Washington.
You know, he is a shapeshifter supreme. I've always had him
He
down
follows power, maybe?
as an architect of globalisation and China and the EU, as a complete representative of the old era. But I'm told that he has adjusted himself and wishes to negotiate a bilateral trade deal with the United States. So what the hell?
On that note, well, fascinating to hear, I think, an optimistic view of Trump from such a senior figure in the Labour movement.
Oh, it's got to be this way. This is reality, and the facts are friendly, right?
Wake up, smell the coffee, or the cup of tea.
Yeah, with bottled milk.
With bottled milk. Lord Glassman, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. My next guest is Labour MP Bill Esterson, the Climate Change Select Committee Chairman. My next guest is Labour MP Bill Esterson, the Climate Change Select Committee Chairman. Bill, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you here.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's great to be with you and to be on with somebody who was born and grew up in my constituency.
Did he?
That's you.
That's me. Well, Lord Glassman, but I'll ask you. You got your coffee there. You got a double espresso, water and milk.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear my best ever coffee story? I went to interview Steve Bannon back in the day when he was...
name dropping as well.
No, he was obviously ally of Donald Trump. And his rider was, I think, a quintuple or quadruple espresso. or
Yeah.
even a sextuple. And we bought this. We got this coffee for him. And he walked into the podcast in a hotel room in London, and we sort of carried it through almost on a tray and laid it there and waiting for him to arrive. Thinking all I can think of, how is he going to drink this coffee? This amazing coffee, powerful coffee. So he walked in and sat down, and I looked at the coffee, and he took it, put it on the mantelpiece, and carried out the interview, and then left without even touching the coffee. So I think his coffee was meant to be a distraction technique to put me off. Is your coffee putting me off? It's not, is it?
Well, you tell me.
It's not. No, I'm happy with coffee.
My first job after university was selling coffee in coffee machines.
Was it? Oh, so that's how you know about coffee?
Well, I know a little bit.
Because you gave quite a detailed order when you arrived.
I like drinking strong coffee, I think it's fair to say.
Now, Bill Esterson, I've just got back from COP29. I flew 2,500 miles there, 2,500 miles back for about 20 hours at the conference. You haven't been yet, of course, but you might go in the future. Next year it's Brazil, so perhaps that might suit you better than Baku. But it was good to be there with Keir Starmer. He announced there, didn't he, the 81% fall in emissions from 1990 levels. The big issue, I think, for listeners to the podcast, viewers of GB News, is will working people pay the price of that?
Working people will benefit from it. I mean, that's the whole...
we haven't seen it yet, though, have we?
It's at the heart of the government's ambition. It's what I'm a Labour MP, and I fought an election on the pledge that we will be...
But you're also a chairman of a cross-party committee.
By 2030. Well, of course, I have to do both things. And look, everybody knows net zero is coming. I think it's a terrible phrase, by the way, because it's so technical, isn't it? We know we have to take action so that our children and grandchildren have got a future. The question is, how do we do it? And at the heart of your question is a very, very important point, which is that people have got to benefit from it as they make the changes that are needed. And I think it's exactly the right question to ask, and it is the question at the heart of what my committee will be carrying out inquiries into.
Retailing this policy is the hardest thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we have, we had Department of Questions on Tuesday, and the question I asked there was about electricity market reform, and the previous government held a consultation into it, and they didn't get around to responding to the consultation.
Yes. Is that pylons?
Marching across the country, connecting the grid. It could include pylons, but the key thing is how do you get the pricing right? We know from the report by the new National Energy Systems Operator, I'll call it NESO from now on for short, because that's what it's called, what it's usually known as, that there are going to be significant capital costs in speeding this all up. Somehow they've got to be paid for. That is absolutely true. I think the key challenge for government is how that doesn't end up on consumers' bills. It was in the manifesto that we envisaged a £300 reduction over the course of
by 2030.
Yes, that's right. And if we are able to be self-sufficient in renewable electricity generation, increasing wind and solar in particular, and some other things too, then you can see how the prices will come down, because it's a very, very cheap way. It's 7 times cheaper to generate electricity from onshore wind, for example, compared to fossil fuels.
If we get there. So just to recap here, the target has been to cut emissions by 68% since 1990 by 2030, and that's been increased to 81% by 2035.
Well, the previous government was 77, and we've taken it up to 81.
81.
And it is there's no question. These are ambitious targets and ambitious challenges, but there are real benefits if we can deliver them. Look, if we can knock a lot off people's electricity bills, if we can create lots of jobs. Look, there's jobs to be had here, really well-paid jobs right across the country. And the great thing about things like renewable energy are a lot of the generation can happen locally. My committee's just launched an inquiry into community energy projects. That will produce jobs, but there are jobs in installing heat pumps. There are jobs in installing electric vehicle charge points, in making the batteries and developing that battery supply chain across the country, and installing the infrastructure. I mean, you mentioned pylons. We're going to have to increase the grid capacity by 5-fold. It is an enormous undertaking, and clearly we've got a lot of work to do as a country. And I don't say that we, because I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, but we as a country, we as a people have got to take each other with. And people have got to benefit from that infrastructure.
It's taking them with them. So I get the jobs idea. In Baku, Sir Keir Starmer announced a £1 billion investment in a blade manufacturer for windmills in Hull. And he said there, and because I've actually seen what he means, he was been to these places and they're all Siemens or German blades, and why aren't they British blades? So that's his first point, and I get that. British jobs, Scottish Power is the company making them.
Yeah.
I get all that, but at some point, I mean, would you live next to a pylon? Would you live next door to a windmill? And if you wouldn't, do you understand the concern about these things? And what is the retail sell? How much money will you give money off fuel bills, for example, if you're living next to one of these things?
Well, we have to take people with. That's absolutely true. I mean, look, there are existing pylons or existing wind turbines, and people live next to them quite happily and have done.
Are they happy
for many years? But I don't think
people
are complaining about.
I mean, I don't know. You see, well, the pylons, I can imagine them not being
the
happy.
Pylons near me don't seem to be bothering anyone. No one's ever raised it with me. But look, we are clearly going to need to see more of these. And the key thing is how do we ensure that there are community benefits?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a very important part of the process, because we've not been very good at taking people with us. And I see it through big housing developments. We've got, I mean, my constituency, and
there's lots of building there.
Lots of building going on in Formby, where you grew up, in McGull, where I live, and it's been really quite controversial. And I don't think that enough was done to take people with, to see the benefits, and to be reassured that there are planning improvements that happen as a result.
And then what they worry about the GP surgery being overwhelmed by new people, schools, places disappear suddenly.
Yeah, and you have to go through the detail, which actually the problem is the shortage of GPs that we already have, let alone whether it's going to change with new housing.
But that retail sell, there's a point, I think, which I haven't heard enough about from the government. But
yeah, and I think there are opportunities. I mean, the Scottish Affairs Committee is going to go and visit the Western Isles, where they already have very strong community energy generation, and interestingly are paying £300 less in bills as the benefit. And people seem to be very happy.
Do you want to see that then? Do you want to see, as the chairman of this committee, do you want to see big offer?
Look, I think one of the ways of doing this, apparently they do this in Austria, where they have community energy and where they have infrastructure investment. They knock money off bills, and people there, from the feedback I've had, are very happy with it. So it's learning from good practice, whether in this country or
it sounds like one of the issues is going to be you get money if the wires, say from pylons, go over your airspace above your house. You get money or compensation, but if you're not, so it's going to come down to that kind of thing. I mean,
I don't think we're going to be seeing many wires. I mean, if you look at the pylons now, that's not how
they go out away from properties.
Yeah, but clearly we're going to have to work hard. So one of the things my committee will undoubtedly be looking at as part of the community energy inquiry that we're holding will be how we get the benefits to local communities.
What if it doesn't work? It is a massive green gamble. So people I speak to on the right of politics, I suppose, they say it's a massive green punt. Why are we not exploiting the hydrocarbons we have already? Some Reform UK going to say, they say coal, but let's park coal. But even at oil and gas in the North Sea is where the Tories are, and the Labour government is taking a big punt on getting this right. And I know energy security matters post Ukraine and the energy shock.
Yeah.
But why not use also what we have here, and why not do it in a more pragmatic way?
Well, this government has made some very pragmatic announcements already, and one of them was on carbon capture usage and storage, which was a £21.7 billion investment over 25 years. Now, the key thing there is it's supporting the oil and gas industry, because it's recognising we're going to need gas in particular for very many years to come. They're also committed to new gas-fired power stations to ensure that there is the backup capacity for where renewables aren't able to deliver.
And modular nuclear, that's going to come too?
Absolutely. And the committee will be meeting Great British Nuclear as well as Great British Energy and the nuclear industry more widely to ask about these questions, because you've got to have a range of technologies, Chris, because that's the future, and it's absolutely.
It's a kind of smorgasbord. On the trip to COP with the Prime Minister, I asked him about his priorities. You're flying all this way to talk about the green policies. What about small boats crisis, NHS waiting lists, safer streets? He replied saying that for him, the economy and migration are the two things he pushes at these summits. Why is he saying that? Do you think? Is he learning a bit of the Trump win last week? Is that a bit of Morgan McSweeney, this strategist, polishing the message? Is he understanding the nuts and bolts matter as much as the environment?
I've always, with my politics, looked at what the priorities are of the people I want to represent, and that's what I've done in Sefton Central for 14 and a half years now. And
growing your majority to the biggest in the country, or one?
Well, it's not the big. I've got the biggest Labour vote outside London. It's not quite the biggest majority, but it's improved, and I think a lot of it is because I listen to people and I reflect what I put first, what matters, and it is about being better off. It is about being able to get an appointment in the health service, and as Keir Starmer said, it is addressing the concerns over the small boats crisis. And if you look at what we've done since the election, you can very much see that's the agenda. And if you take the budget, increasing the national living wage, putting vast sums of money into the health service, are both very strong indicators. And what the health,
if it all works,
and it's interesting actually. There's not much news from about the Home Office anymore, because they're quietly getting on the job with the job. We'll
wait and see on returns flights and the rest. We haven't seen the evidence of that. I can see why the country voted Labour in July. I think lots of people felt worse off under the Tories, and enough of them felt worse off to vote Labour and give a Newton party a chance. I mean, I can see why that happened, but whether this new strategy of huge tax to spend works, we'll wait and see.
Well, it's we've protected the pay packets of working people. That's been very, very important because we recognise that people have been worse off. If we look just back over the last 14 years and compare what's happened elsewhere in the world, we've seen a significant decline. People are £5,800 a year, or households on average are £5,800 a year worse off than they would have been had we had the same growth rate that of the average of the rest of the biggest 38 countries.
There's a price being paid, though. I mean, small firms are annoyed about the increase in national insurance costs, aren't they?
Well, interestingly, Chris, the majority of small firms were protected from it and are either better off or no worse off. And I think that was a very, very important step by Rachel Reeves to ensure that the very smallest firms...
Pubs and bars are saying it'll put 10p on a pint of beer.
There are people where taxes have gone up, and we had an in-year deficit of £20 billion to close, and we needed to fund improvements in public services, and that can only come by raising taxes. And the first financial commitment of the Chancellor is that the cost of running the public realm will be paid for by taxation, which
that's a new rule in year.
And it didn't happen under the last government, and that was something we had to do.
COVID happened. I mean, that was 400 billion quid.
Well, they were running in-year deficits. There were problems before that.
But I think we do. If you forget the shocks. I mean,
but if you look at the health service, we already had very serious problems with waiting lists and waiting times before COVID, and we had problems with our energy system before Putin invaded Ukraine, and clearly we have to address it. And coming back to my role as a select committee chair, very, very keen that we give ourselves energy independence and create that security and get down bills.
In the past, you've been the shadow small business minister. Do you think the government, with your past hat on, appears to be annoying those groups, small business farmers, so pensions aren't companies, but they'll be pretty annoyed about the winter fuel payment. Small businesses, is the government fixated enough on small companies?
Look, people running small businesses, more than half of them will either be the same or better off as a result of national insurance changes. But those who are paying more, they benefit from improving the health service. Their workers need good health care. They need that investment that's happening actually in repairing the roads, which
potholes
also announced. I mean, that was the number one issue I had when I was a shadow roads minister.
Well, it was like driving on a minefield last winter, and in night time when it's shiny roads, you didn't know we were going to punch.
Well, when I had that brief before the election, we calculated that there were 100 times as many potholes in the UK as there were craters on the moon.
Were there? And, how many holes did it take to fill Albert Hall?
No, we're getting into a bit of nostalgia and Liverpool culture here.
We are a bit.
The Beatles reference there.
Beatles,
Chris,
indeed.
Very well done.
Should civil servants have a 4-day week? Emma Reynolds, the pensions minister, says they're not going to get it. I mean, that's about right. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I don't think it's a question of how many days. I think it's how much you produce and how productive you are. And there's this balance between how many hours you work in a day, where you work, whether you work in the office or with technology. You can work at home. We learned a lot from COVID.
So compressed hours is what you're saying? So longer days.
I mean, I don't object to it if you can get the work done. But there are some jobs where it's just not practical, isn't it? And you have to stick with a 5-day week. But I think you have to be open.
So you're open to that, are you? Okay. Not a return to the 70s, as she said today on Times Radio. No.
Oh, well, I didn't hear what Emma said. So.
But you wouldn't. The point of it is, it's not a return to the 70s. In modern day Britain, you can do it because of.
I think for some people, I mean, there are people who for a long time have been doing 4-day shifts. This is not exactly new.
No.
I know people who work 4 days on, 4 days off.
Yes, MPs don't, of course. They're 7-day operation.
Like Telegraph journalists. Oh, no, you're having a day off tomorrow. No, you're very much entitled. Even MPs take days off occasionally.
Okay, just going back to Donald, to the big issue of the week, Donald Trump and climate change. He has called it a big hoax. A green scam. I mean, how on earth do you work with someone like that? And has he got a point? Will his remarks, and we'll hear more of that going forward, I'm sure, as he drills more for hydrocarbons, will that change the debate here about your agenda, your government's agenda, and perhaps your personal agenda about climate change?
I think there are a number of things. Like Keir Starmer's been very positive in his welcoming of Donald Trump's victory. He recognises it's in our interests as well as in the US's interests to work closely together. I noticed that ExxonMobil said they plan to continue to divest out of fossil fuels and into renewables, and I suspect that Donald Trump and his administration will be driven by what business is saying as much as by anything. So I suspect we'll see a continuation of the move towards decarbonisation in the United States. But it is also an opportunity here, if we can show the kind of climate leadership that Keir Starmer set out when he was in Baku, and it was a very, very
he was the only one of two G7 members.
Very noticeable that he turned up to say we're back and we're going to show climate leadership, and we're very well placed with the technology and some of the geographical opportunities we have in this country to lead for people here to benefit and for us to export the technology internationally and benefit there too.
It's a big gamble, and we'll get you back on the podcast in a couple of years' time, see if it's worked out. And just finally, the vote on assisted dying is coming back to Parliament shortly. How will you vote?
Look, we have to. I mean, I'm inclined to vote for it. I'll say that, and it's because I've had constituents. I went through this with my dad last year, and those last weeks particularly were awful. I mean, alongside this, whether we do it or not, we've got to improve palliative care. But if we do it, we have to see safeguards. So I probably supported it at second reading, but I'll be looking at what safeguards.
The line by line analysis.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to build adequate safeguards in to make sure that all of the concerns that people quite rightly have, that this isn't exploited.
Coercive control, all sorts of areas we know more about.
I agree about those concerns. People are writing to me all the time on both sides of the argument, actually, and I think it's a delicate balance. But in the end, for some people, that avoiding that awful last period before death is hugely important. So we've got to find a way of doing this. But in the end, when the legislation has finally been amended, I think we're going to need to take great care to decide whether we actually go for it at that stage.
Okay, listen, Bill Esterson, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. And thank you earlier to Lord Glassman, of course. And thank you for listening wherever you are. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Email me chopper@gbnews.uk. Are you on X, Bill Esterson?
I'm on X.
What are you? What are you called?
I am Bill_Esterson.
There we are. Good. The MP for Sefton Central.
Yeah.
Indeed. If you enjoyed this, please do tell your friends. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find the podcast. Thanks to the brilliant team of GB News colleagues behind this podcast: Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Nunes, and George McMillan. And most importantly of all, thank you to you again for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Bill does, and who doesn't, catch me during the week.
How could you not want more Chopper?
GB News week, during the week, whenever I pop up with political news and analysis, and at midday on Wednesdays for our show PMQs Live with Gloria De Piero when Parliament is sitting. But do keep up to date with all our best reporting as well on our website, gbnews.com. Until next time, though, from a very warm but not climatically changed hot studio, cheerio!
Cheerio.